Light novels are a form of short novel that are very popular in Japan. Usually they not only contain lots of words, but anime pictures as well. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how you can create your very own light novel. I hope you enjoy this video and it helps you with your manga creations. Hi everyone! If you don't already know me, my name is Midnight Cross and on this channel, I dedicate all my videos to helping you turn your manga into a masterpiece. I'm currently working on my own manga titled Having Faith, which you might hear me talk about in today's video, but also in other videos on my channel. Now, if you're new to my channel and you'd love to see more videos just like this one today, please consider subscribing and hitting that little bell icon to get notified every time I upload something new. I upload a new video every Sunday and Thursday all about manga creating, and I'd love to have you join me on the channel. Now, if you're a native English speaker and you're not natively from Japan, then you may think it is harder to create a light novel, and it is. However, there is something that's called OELN, which stands for Original English Light Novel. Light novels tend to be in series, but you can also create a one-shot light novel. Light novels also usually come with either black and white illustrations or colour illustrations to go along with some of the words in the book. It's usually about 3 or 4 coloured illustrations, but it really depends on each individual light novel. So first of all, let's get the technical details out of the way. This is stuff like about page size, word count, and so on. So the average length of a light novel is about 50,000 words. They are usually published in bunkobon size, which is about A6 size. 10.5 centimeters by 14.8 centimeters. Usually there will be multiple volumes in a light novel series. They usually start off in Japan by being serialized in anthology magazines before being collected in book form, similar to how manga is. Some popular light novel magazines in Japan include Dragon Magazine and Dengeki Bunko. When you're creating your light novel, you might want to type it in a program like Microsoft Word. So my first tip is to choose your target audience. Most light novels are written targeted towards a young adult audience. However, you may also want to target it for younger teens or also for adults. It's really up to you who your target audience is, but you need to keep in mind who that target audience is to make sure the content in your light novel suits that audience. For example, a light novel that is targeted more towards younger teenagers would probably be a lot less violent than a light novel that may be targeted towards adults. Just for an example. So when you are writing a light novel, you want to keep in mind who your target audience is and think about what they would most like to get from your book and how you can write your light novel in such a way that it really appeals to that audience. Now, another thing I want to mention here is when it comes to your target audience, you might also want to consider your country. Now, if you want to use Japanese jokes or Japanese things in there, just keep in mind that outside of Japan, sometimes those jokes may not be fully understood. In order to get your light novel the most popularity and the most understanding, you probably want to create a light novel that can be understood whether someone is in Japan, in your country, or in any other country in the world. So when you're writing your light novel, you might want to stay away from, slang from your country or extra jokes from your country, and that way it can be understood to a wider group of people rather than just a small select number of people. My second tip is to choose your genres. Some of the most popular light novels are isekai or fantasy. However, you can choose those genres of course, or you could choose any other genre you like. There is just about any light novel for any genre you can imagine. I recommend you choose what genres you want to focus on the most in your light novel, and then it may help if you look at light novels in your chosen genre to see what their writing style is like and use it for inspiration. Choose about 2 or 3 genres for your light novel to help you focus on what it may be about and be able to keep that genre consistently as you continue to write your light novel. My third step to the process of creating a light novel is to start with character designs. Even if it is a light novel with writing, the characters are still really important, and having good designs and good, interesting characters is something that's really important. You also need to consider what role your characters play in your light novel and why they are there. Try coming up with different characters with unique personalities. My recommendation for creating a popular light novel character is to choose one aspect of their design that makes them unique. For example, Shiro's rainbow hair or Okabe's lab coat. Or there's also Rem and Ram with their similar styles but differently coloured hair. If you want to make your character design appealing and interesting to a wider audience, try and think of at least one aspect of the character design that really stands out or is different from a lot of other characters. A lot of light novels usually show images of the character designs at the start. However, this aspect is mostly so you know in your own mind what your characters are like, and especially if you give your character a unique feature, it's something other characters in the light novel can point out and describe. For example, a character might always wear a ribbon in their hair, and when they're suddenly not wearing the ribbon in their hair, there may be something wrong, like they may be sad about something and they're not wearing the ribbon in their hair. So that's just one example of a way you can describe a character with a mental image and then use it to describe what the character does in their daily life. I also recommend you make notes of your character's personality and traits. Their traits and personality are things that can really show in their dialogue and make them way more interesting as characters. A bubbly character would talk in a much different way than an aggressive character would, just for an example. My fourth tip is to brainstorm plot ideas and try and find ways to be unique. The next step of this process is to try and get the ideas out of your mind and be able to work with those ideas and develop them further. For example, you may want to create an isekai light novel. However, if you look at the isekai that you want to create, like you have your base ideas, you want to work with those ideas and try and develop them further into more ideas. So you could look at the ideas you already have and ask further questions like, how do they get to this world? What is that world like? When do they get to this world? What is their main problem in the story? What are their goals? And just continue asking yourself questions and writing down notes based off your questions in order to slowly develop your ideas further. I recommend that when you're further brainstorming, you answer the basic questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how, and then you slowly develop your questions further. And there's a lot of questions you could ask yourself based off those main questions. You could say, who are your characters? What is the situation? And so on. You can ask a lot of questions just from those questions, and you could use them to further develop new ideas. Alternatively, if you have too much plot ideas and you want to sort of narrow it down, try highlighting or circling the ideas you really want to focus on and consider how you can merge those ideas together in order to create something more simplified for your light novel. It may even help just to highlight the notes that you want to focus on, because during the brainstorming you may come up with a lot of ideas that you're not actually going to use. So if you highlight your ideas or circle them and then move on from those ideas, it's going to help you to look back over your brainstorming and know what ideas you really want to focus on. My fifth step to creating a light novel is to build your world or write important locations. Now this really depends on your genre. If you're writing in a genre like horror or comedy, then the world building may not be as important than it would be in a fantasy or isekai. It really depends on your genre. If you are having something that really needs a whole lot of world building like fantasy, isekai, or sci-fi, then you may need to go further into structuring your world and making it a more interesting world, because you are building a world. It's a world that you are creating. However, if you are just having, something like comedy or horror or slice of life, you may not have to world build as much. However, it is important that you still write down the important locations. In this part of the process, I will explain how to world build and also how to write down the important locations that you may want to focus on. So if your light novel isn't fully focused on world building, then just writing down a few key locations can be helpful. So special buildings like school or home or a park can really help you to know what places will be important in your light novel. For example, if your light novel is set in modern times, then there may only be a few key locations you really want to show in your story, like the school, the character's home, their friend's house, and so on. Now, when it comes to something like more complex world building, then there are various aspects to consider. More complex world building may be used in fantasy or isekai, and not only do you need to consider buildings, but also the population of that world, the work, the currency, and the magic systems, among other things. Of course, since this is a light novel, not everything will be explained. However, it can help to have this in your mind because it will help to draw the readers into your fantasy world. Not only that, but the world in your story should relate to your character's goals. Over the course of your character achieving things in your story, they should explore the world you have created. If you want to know more about world building, you might want to check out this video where I go into all of the details. And if you want to learn about magic systems, I have this video as well. My sixth tip to writing a light novel is to build basic plot structure. A basic plot structure has an exposition, a rising action, the climax, falling action, and resolution. Your entire plot should follow this kind of structure. The exposition is how you start your story, so it's where you tell information about your characters, the world, and the main goal. The rising action usually focuses on your character working towards their goals. In most light novels, this may happen over a few volumes as your character goes on their quest and meets other characters or goes on other subplots. However, with that, I should also mention that each volume of a light novel should have its own mini plot structure in each volume. Now, the climax is the main point of the story. It's usually where there is a big problem. This is where the tension and conflict that have been built up over the story all lead to this moment. It is the biggest moment in the story that all the other points have led up to. In a fantasy story, this climax moment may be where the characters suddenly realize that their world is crumbling and they don't know what to do. In a shonen, the character may feel defeated as the villain returns stronger than ever before. Now, the falling action of the story is where the problem resolves. It wraps up the previous points of the story and helps bring things towards an ending. And the resolution is the ending of your story. Whether it's a good or bad ending, there is an ending that ties up the points you've made during the course of your story. So that is just the basic plot structure of how you can plan a plot. I recommend you look at each of these points, look at each part of your plot, the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution, and write down little notes of how you want that area of your story to be. Write down notes about what you want to happen at that point in your story. Now, as I mentioned, you should have two kinds of plot structures. You should have a plot structure for your whole story, regardless of the different volumes, and you should also try and consider a plot structure for each volume of your light novel that you may have. Each volume, even if it may not conclude completely, should still follow this same plot structure in every volume. It should still have an exposition, a rising action, the climax, falling action, and resolution in every single volume, even though the main story will also have that same plot structure. My seventh tip is introduce the main problem at the start. Introducing the main problem at the start lets the readers know what the character is really working towards, and it makes the readers interested to know what happens next and see how the character is going to resolve that problem. For example, if you look at the light novel No Game No Life, you'll notice how the main problem, well, it's not really a problem for them, but the main situation in the story is shown at the beginning when the two characters get sucked into the game world. That is just one example, and I'm sure there's heaps of other light novel examples I could use. However, just keep in mind that when you're writing your own light novel, try and get to the main problem as soon as possible, or at least the main action as soon as possible to really draw your readers in. So my 8th step to creating a light novel is to divide your plot into volumes. Of course, this only applies if you are writing a multi-volume light novel series and you're not just writing a one-shot. Now, if you're dividing your plot into multiple volumes, as I mentioned before, they should each follow the same plot structure as the main story would. The way you can do this is you can look at the main plot you have and write little notes about where you want each volume to end. You could even just draw lines where each part of the plot is and where you would like to end each part of the story. I recommend that when you're ending a volume in your light novel series, you try and end it on a cliffhanger or a plot twist, because that is something that will really make the readers interested to know what happens next. If you leave it on something unexpected or a plot twist, it makes the readers wonder what will happen, and the only way for them to find out what happens next is for them to read the next volume in your light novel series. So my 9th step to creating a light novel is to choose a narrator and a point of view. Now, if you look at most light novels, the narrator will usually be the main character of the story, and it will usually be told in first person, so I, we, us. Since the view is in first person, it's a good way to bring readers into the story and make them feel like they are the main character and experiencing the events. There is also third person view, which is a little bit more difficult to write in a light novel, however it is still something that is very popular in a lot of light novels. Third person is writing with he, she, they, them, and so on, starting with those kinds of words and describing it from a third person perspective. There is also second person, but it is very rarely used. It's usually used in fanfiction reader inserts, so you might have seen it there. It's usually you, your, and so on. It's directing it towards the reader. So consider what kind of story you want to tell, what character would be best narrating it, and what viewpoint it would be best from. Different kinds of viewpoints may be able to emphasize various genres better, so I recommend you experiment with this. Maybe try writing little paragraphs in each person view and seeing what suits your kind of genre the best. My 10th tip is write a strong beginning, usually with some action or some conflict. Now, I talked a little bit about this before, but I will detail it a bit further now. In a light novel, you want to start in the action as quickly as possible. So you could either start with a conflict or introduce the problem really early on. I recommend you look at popular light novels because they usually start in this method. By introducing a conflict or a problem and starting it at the very beginning, it makes the story more interesting a lot faster. Rather than slowly introducing the characters and the world, getting into the action can keep readers interested for longer. You don't really need to take the beginning part of the story and use it to introduce the characters. Characters can be introduced in the middle of an action. Even if there is a conflict or an action event, the way the character reacts to that or how the character responds in those kind of situations really tells a lot about that character. So rather than introducing your character and saying like, hi, I go to school here, this is my grade, this is my friends. Instead, you can sort of show those characters in the moment and say, you know, this is what happened when everything changed, and then there's all these dramatic moments. And that really draws a reader in and makes them feel like they are a part of the action too. My 11th tip is get to the point as quickly as possible. Now by this, I don't mean skipping valuable character development or valuable information to your story. No, I don't mean that. Even if you add some slower moments throughout your story, if they are moments that develop character or are crucial to building up something in your story, then they are important. By this, I mean make sure every moment you add in your story is important to the story. Make sure it moves the story forward in some way. For example, character development can happen while the characters are working towards their goal. World building can happen while your character is getting to that destination. So you don't really need to have the slower moments where characters might be explaining something, or even moments where characters are just walking to school or sitting in class. You could still have those important character development moments or world building even as your character is still progressing in the story. What I recommend you do is I recommend you look at each scene you are writing in your light novel and consider if it is important to your story and how it is moving the story forward in some way. In order to keep it fast-paced and interesting, try and get to the action as soon as possible, or try and make slower scenes something with a little bit more action and entertainment to keep your readers interested. My 12th tip is write realistic dialogue for your characters. Accents, patterns of speech, and traits are something you should really keep in mind when you are writing the dialogue for your characters. This is why I think it's important to develop characters first when you are creating a light novel, because in this way you have an idea of how their dialogue should sound, whether it be cute dialogue, blunt words, calm speech, or so on. Accents and speaking habits should also be remembered. Also keep in mind that with dialogue, not everything is explained. In our own dialogue, we cut out a lot of things, which helps it to feel more natural. It might help if you record your own speaking voice in a natural conversation and think about the things you say. In the dialogue in your story, try and cut it down and focus on keeping the words as natural as possible. For example, you might not have a character saying, "Hi, how are you today?" If it was in their personality, they might say, "Hi, what's up?" or "Hi, how's it going?" or "Hey, man, what's going on?" So it doesn't have to always be the same kind of dialogue. You can actually say a lot about a character by the way they say things or the way they speak. Maybe your character even has a sort of dialogue habit that they might say. My 13th tip is use a mix of descriptive wording and dialogue. Now, light novels are usually very dialogue heavy. There's usually a lot of dialogue in light novels, more so than there is in Western novels. It's one of the attributes of a light novel. However, you want to sort of find a balance. You want to make sure that you have enough dialogue so that you can understand what the characters are saying, but you also want to make sure you add enough descriptive wording in order to help your readers paint an image of what's happening in their minds. You want to really find that balance and make sure you have enough wording so that your characters know what's happening, but not so much that it becomes like a regular novel. So let me give you two examples. The first example is going to be something without descriptive wording and with just the dialogue, and then the next example is going to be something with a mix of descriptive wording and dialogue. So here is the first example without descriptive wording. "I'm sorry I'm late." "You're always late. I'd be more surprised if you arrived on time." "Right, sorry ma'am." So from this dialogue, we can tell a little bit, but without the descriptive wording, it's sort of hard to know what actions are happening and where it's taking place. It's hard to know exactly what's going on. Adding a little bit of descriptive wording to this may help the readers to understand the situation better and get a better mental idea of what is happening. Here's another example with more descriptive lines. "I raced towards my classroom, pulling back the handle and hearing the familiar creak of the door. I'm sorry I'm late." Mrs. Kettle looked up and scowled. "You're always late," she muttered. "I would be more surprised if you arrived on time." And I'd be more surprised if you smiled for once, I thought, before apologising as I always did. Now remember that not everything needs to be said. As you might have noticed from the second example, I took out the final lines of dialogue and I replaced it with descriptive words instead. Instead of having the character say, "Right, sorry ma'am," I wrote in the descriptive wording that the character apologised as they always did. So that is a way to replace dialogue with descriptive wording. And when you are writing your dialogue in your light novel, sometimes it can help to take out lines of dialogue and replace it with descriptive wording. Sometimes it makes things sound better and makes it more easier to read for your readers. So when you are looking at your light novel or editing the dialogue, try and find places where you might be able to replace certain lines of dialogue with more descriptive wording in order to really help bring your readers into the scene and make them understand what is really happening a lot better. A mix of both descriptive wording and dialogue can really make a light novel paragraph a lot more appealing. My 14th tip is cut out the unnecessary parts. If a part of the story is unnecessary or it seems to slow down the story a bit, then you may want to cut it out if it is not driving the story. As I mentioned before, it's really important to continually drive your story. And so if there are parts of the story that seem to slow it down, consider cutting them out in order to make the story more interesting and maybe replace them with scenes with higher development or more fast-paced scenes. If a scene is not needed in the story, then you may want to remove it from the story and replace it with a scene that is more necessary. Tip number 15 is keep going through this whole process until you have written your light novel. It may take some time, but remember to be patient with yourself and have fun with the process. It's about having fun, and if you have fun as you are writing your light novel, it's going to make it a lot more easier to create it and also make the words stand out more and make the words more meaningful. The 16th step to creating a light novel, and it is optional, is add illustrations. There are usually illustrations in a light novel not only on the cover, but inside the book as well. However, if you don't want to draw pictures, it's totally up to you. You don't have to have a light novel with pictures inside it. You can just limit it to the cover art. It's really up to you and each individual author how much art you want to include in your novel. If you are adding illustrations, try and add illustrations to accompany various parts of your novel. They can really add a lot to a scene. You also don't have to add the illustrations yourself. You can work with an artist or collaborate with an artist in order to make the illustrations for your book. There are places like People Per Hour or Upwork where you could pay for artists to illustrate certain illustrations to go along with your light novel. Now the 17th and final step to creating a light novel is to publish it. Once you have gone through this process and created your own light novel, now it's time to get people reading it and get it out to viewers. Now there are 3 ways to publish a light novel. There's online publishing, self-publishing, and traditional publishing. So you could post it online on a website like Wattpad, or you could create your own website and upload chapters of your light novel there. There are also forums where you can advertise it, like Webnovel or on different subreddits. You can self-publish your light novel through various self-publishing printers, including Lulu, Barnes & Noble Press, or Print Ninja. You can check out this video where I go into all of the details on self-publishing. Now, traditional publishing is much more difficult, especially for a light novel. If you want it to be like a normal light novel, you can try sending it to a Japanese magazine like Dengeki Bunko or Chirano. However, your best bet for traditional publishing a light novel would be to find a small publishing house in your own country and send it there along with a resume and a cover letter to address yourself to that company. Overall, publishing a light novel in traditional means can be a little more difficult. However, if you're willing to experiment and try publishing it through a more novel-like way, then it is easier to get your light novel out there. Obviously, Japanese light novels are a little bit harder to publish in a Western world. However, if you want to experiment with it, and of course you may be interested in publishing it online and getting more readers, that is the best way to slowly grow. Try and build up your audience online through posting your light novel on an online website or on your website, and then try and either self-publish or, traditionally publish your light novel and get those copies out there and just see and experiment with it, because it is more of a new medium in this kind of Western world, but it is something that you might want to experiment with and try and bring forth more original English light novels. Thank you so much for watching my video today, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what kind of light novels you're creating because I would love to hear about it. Feel free to chat with me on any of my social media at MidnightXCross because I would love to hear from you. Again, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye!